Ed, is match fixing in cricket as big a problem now as it's ever been?
I think so, because what's key is money, and money in the size of an illegal Indian market is estimated to be about $200 billion a year, and that figure is rising. So when you've got such a huge pot of illegal money, the threat remains the same, and possibly the threat rising as well. And you've also got far more satellite franchise leagues than we've ever had before. We'll probably start talking about the genesis of match fixing, when it all started, and we didn't have those franchise leagues then. You didn't have backpack of cricketers going from team to team, often with perhaps little loyalty to that franchise or badge. So I suspect it's high. Just because we're not hearing so much about it now, we may well hear about something soon, you never know. I don't think it means that it's not happening.
Just on the money, so you work for Betfair, which is an exchange in the UK, and you go on Betfair on an IPL game, and £130 million has been exchanged on that game. That's a UK betting exchange, but there are Indian betting exchanges, I think they're called skins, all the way through, that use the same sort of mathematics. And people tell me that if it's 130 million on the UK betting exchange, then you put an extra zero on the end for what's being bet on India on some of those games. And some of those games go over 200 and 300 million in the UK. It is ridiculous amounts of money on individual games. England, women's, Pakistan the other day went, I don't even know why anyone was betting on this game, because it was quite clear that England were going to win all the way through in the women's game. There was still $5 million traded on that game. And that's just on the match result, let alone everything else. There is so much money being bet on individual games at any time.
Yeah, and the market has changed. You mentioned the word skins there. That's Indian bookmakers using the skin of a betting exchange, something like Betfair, to use their odds and then bet with their customers in India. So the proliferation of skins is relatively new. 10 years ago, we're talking about bookmakers using cell phones and writing down their bets in Excel or on pieces of paper or what have you. But now it's becoming a little bit more sophisticated. And that also means there's far more money swirling around than there was.
And how do you bet if you're in India and it's illegal? So do you telegram someone? Do you go down to the local off license and slip 20 under the thing? How do you actually make the bets if you're in India and you're betting with, I assume, people in UAE and other countries?
Yeah, cell phones, WhatsApp now.
Yep.
You'll be able to do it via email.
And you just send like PayPal or something, is it, or Cash App or something?
All those ways of sending money, or you use the Havala system in India, which is a person-to-person money exchange. And I think because the market has changed and you've got more technology involved now, the money has increased and the ways of betting has become easier in India. It used to be a situation where you would have the phone number of the bookmaker on your mobile phone and you would phone up and then it would be answered, and that phone call would be put through via a speakerphone. You've got someone writing down the odds and the bets that people want, and somebody shouting out the odds as the match is being played out. So it's a bit more sophisticated than it was 10, 15 years ago, and particularly when I went out to India to sort of work undercover, so to speak, to find out how it all worked. It's got far more sophisticated than it was back then.
It used to be that the anti-corruption officer at the game would be scanning the crowd, and there were telltale signs if there's somebody at the back with a laptop. And is that still going on, or is it more sophisticated than that?
Yeah, that's something called courtsiding, where you've got somebody in the stand
at the venue,
watching the odds, placing bets, because there's a time delay from what happens, as you know, out live to how it appears on people's TV screens at home. So if you've got somebody in the stand
with software,
they can be placing those bets, and you've got a 8-10 second delay or whatever it was. You're able to get your bets on before the majority of people see that at home. And when I was in the press box back in the day, you'd see a few journalists on there having a little bit on some of the exchanges.
Really?
Yeah, I remember seeing some people having a little bit off on the time delay, and you also see it in tennis as well. Nobody in this room, and all good, upstanding characters, I'm sure.
The betting websites are blocked in press boxes.
And on the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, they did. I think they did. That was a
cannot
response
get-
to that. Yeah.
Yeah, you
Right.
cannot get on a betting site in a press box.
But we still have at each game an anti-corruption officer, isn't there? Who's ex-police usually.
Yeah.
And what is he looking for? He's scanning the ground. He's looking all over, as policemen do. They're casing the joint.
I think he's just there sort of as a visual deterrent because,
Do you mean for the players?
yeah,
What-
security for the players, security
So
for the administration.
What's always intrigued me, when the players get to a venue and come off the bus, they've got to put their mobile phone into a bag. What if you've got two mobile phones?
Yeah. What if you've got a mobile phone secreted in your
Yes.
bat
I'll
holder
put
or what
this
have
in.
you? You know.
I'll put this phone in, but
Yeah.
I've actually got another four phones.
So when I was with the team and I had to go through all this.
Which team?
It was when I was with St. Lucia. So it was the first time I'd ever done it. And I went to my meeting beforehand and they said, don't fix games. And I was like, I'm on board. I can handle that. And then I said to the guy, but I'm an analyst. I've got a laptop. What do I do with it? And he goes, oh yeah, just turn off the Wi-Fi on your computer. I went, oh great, do I have to show someone this? He goes, no, I trust you. I went, well, I'm sitting in the dugout with a laptop. If I just press the button, the Wi-Fi will come back up and I can do anything. And no one ever checked. And it was so bizarre to me that there was this illusion of security, but actually anything could happen. And there was one game, Bumble, you like this. Suddenly I started getting WhatsApp messages during the game and I realized I'd forgot to turn it and off. And it was, obviously I was still online. No one checked. I never got in trouble for it at all. So it does show you that it's not exactly airtight and you can, certainly things can slip through.
Can you tell me the different ways that a player can be involved in match fixing?
Okay, well, I mean, if you're a batsman, one of the things you might be asked to do if you've been corrupted is to score slowly in a 20-20 match in the power play. That's going to make a huge difference to the odds. If you're not scoring at 8, 9, 10 and over, you're going at considerably less than that. Your corruptor immediately has an edge which he can play on the betting markets. And often it's not a case of match fixing being an exact science or spot fixing being an exact science. It is information is power, and the corruptor can bet with some confidence that he has somebody on the inside who is going to do his bidding for him. And it may not always come off, but the corruptor has the edge and some influence, and that is sort of spot fixing at sort of the lower end of the spectrum. That is sort of minimal expectation a corruptor may have.
When you released your book, one of the points you made back then was that there were only 3 markets that you could really bet on within cricket.
Yeah.
Brackets being one of them, so the breakdown of overs. And maybe you can just explain a little bit more about that, but has the game and the way people can bet now changed dramatically since then, insofar that you can affect or bet on so many different aspects of the game that maybe you couldn't do 10 years ago?
No, I don't think it has changed. So in India, and we have match fixing in cricket because there is a huge illegal betting system in India. Match fixing doesn't really exist without that. If it's a legal system, you then have paper trails, and it's much, much harder to start influencing matches. But the reason I wrote my book was because there was confusion, let's say, about how the Indian market worked. People believed, and people in the ICC at the time believed, you could bet on all these weird and wonderful things. I mean, for an example, like a no ball being bowled, which you can't bet on in India. You can bet on, you mentioned brackets, which is a certain amount of runs to be scored in a certain amount of time. That might be a power play in a T20. The innings runs, who's going to win the match, and something which is called the Lambi, which is, the lunch favourite, which is who is going to be the favourite at the innings break. So you've got those basic markets. You can't bet on a no ball being scored or fielding positions or all these weird and wonderful things which were being chucked around at the time, the Cronier scandal and lastly the Mohammed Amir Pakistan no ball scandal.
So you can bet on whether there's going to be a wide or a wicket on the first ball with a lot of bookmakers in the UK now. So,
Yeah.
And in India, you can bet on the exact score of each ball. You can say, 0, 1, whatever, but you can't bet on wides and no balls within play. And a lot of that is because even those bookmakers, even if they are illegal bookmakers, they also don't want to be in a situation where, where the players can do stuff like that, right?
Yeah, because bookmakers, strangely, they don't want to lose money. So if we take the Mohammed Amir example, when he was going to bowl a no ball at Lords, if you go to a bookmaker and say, and it doesn't matter where they are in the world, I want 500 quid on Amir to bowl a no ball off this ball, they're not going to take that bet because they know that something's up. And that is the case whether it's on your high street with William Hill or your back street bookie in Bhopal. So,
whereas if you're looking at brackets, so when we talk about brackets, in a T20 game now, someone like Betfair, you'll be able to bet on 3 overs, 6 overs, 8 overs, 10 overs, 12, 15, all these different brackets.
What the score would be.
What the score will be over or under on all those sorts of things. But there's so much money being invested by fans on that if you did have inside information on that, one bet may not be as obvious as it would be if you were the person who went in and said, on the 14th, in the 14th over on the third ball, I think there's going to be a wide. There's a big difference between those two different things. So what they're trying to do really is, and it's what you were saying before about the spot fixing, right? They're trying to go into markets where there's already a lot of liquidity, there's already a lot of money in, and then warp it a little bit by going, well, the run line for this, at the end of this power play, we expect it to be 54 runs, but we have paid a guy to make sure it's going to be under 48 so that we're pretty clear there. That's kind of what they're doing, isn't it?
yeah, liquidity, basically means money flow, loads of money.
Yes.
The more money you've got in a market, the more likely you're able to hide something not quite right. You're not going to be looking at markets which have absolutely no money in whatsoever. So that's why we go back to those core Indian markets which are offered. And those core Indian markets are offered across the spectrum in India. And it works a lot like sort of a franchise system. So you'll have a syndicate which sets the odds and they control, 10, 20,000 bookmakers across the country. And those bookmakers are sort of subscribing to those odds, which they give out to their customers.
Do you feel that players are vulnerable in this? The players themselves, are they approached? Is there still evidence that players are being approached? We used to have stings, didn't we? We used to have people who come in and they'd do a sting on a player. Is that still going on?
Yeah, I think we had a case in Caribbean Premier League with a player, either the end of last year or this year, who's been censored. So it's still happening. I think the lesser known or lesser popular franchise tournaments are hugely vulnerable. I think there's a huge problem in franchise T20 cricket now with governance generally. It's almost non-existent in T20 cricket. It's almost like the Wild West. There are no sort of safeguards or safety latches across the governance spectrum, whether that be safeguarding or match fixing, really.
Even ensuring that people get paid. I mean, the FICA came out recently and said, I think it was something like 40 to 60% of players had said that they'd had, payments over 6 months late from, leagues. So it's that bad. And the other thing that you notice in the T20 leagues is that if you go on tour with a group of younger players from England, they go to Pakistan or something, there's someone in charge of it to make sure that everyone's looked after and no one's left behind. T20 leagues quite often don't have that. So you have young overseas players who come up for these leagues who don't speak the language in the country they're in. They don't understand the culture. There was a story of one of the Afghanistani players who was locked in a hotel for 4 days because he didn't know he had to ask for his per diem, so he didn't have any money. And he didn't know how to get any money out. So he just stayed in the hotel for 4 days eating the crisps that were in the room. And so there's no real welfare of these players. And then that's in the Big Bash. So what happens when they go to some of these smaller leagues and they go to Canada and all these sorts of things? There really isn't a lot of management of those players. So they're even more susceptible. And then a lot of those leagues, how many leagues do people like you and I look at, Ed, and we go, why does this league exist? It can't
Right.
possibly make money. And we know that they sell the betting rights to some companies in some cases, but it still doesn't, the windfall doesn't make sense, does it? This league does not need to exist and doesn't appear to ever be profitable.
Yeah, I think some of those safeguarding issues that you mentioned there is really alarming from a governance linked to match fixing situation, because if you've got players who are not actually being looked after, they don't have a code of conduct, or there's no idea about what their rights are or what their responsibilities are, and there's no interest at all from ownership groups or the boards which are running these leagues in getting some basic governance principles in place. You have a very loose culture within that tournament and within a team, then players are vulnerable to be approached. It creates a sort of rotten culture from the start.
Is this why, if you were to look at the number, the identities of players that have been sanctioned for match fixing and their involvement in match fixing, the majority of them, certainly over the last 10 years, they have pretty much all been linked to T20 franchise leagues or T10 franchise leagues rather than to international cricket? Is that because there is more governance in international cricket, or is that one of the reasons?
Yeah, it could be one of the reasons, but I think the ICC Integrity Unit probably is far more stretched than it has ever been. We've got new leagues coming up all the time. I think they're pretty solid in terms of they know what they're doing with international teams, and they've been working in the international environment for a long time. But when you've got these satellite leagues just sprouting up from nowhere, I mean, we could have something in Saudi Arabia soon or somewhere like that. We've got Major League in the US coming up for their second season. So all these different leagues is stretching the ICC Integrity Unit, possibly beyond its capabilities. I wouldn't be surprised if they would need some more hands on deck, because there's been such an explosion in leagues that they can't really have the resources anymore, and they wouldn't have had huge resources 5-10 years ago. So there are issues there in terms of getting the coverage, and these leagues will buy anti-corruption coverage off the shelf from the ICC, so they will put their man with the tournament or maybe two people with that tournament, and they will be there to try and safeguard it and make sure people aren't corrupting it.
But in that situation, are the players who would be a lot of unknowns, are they vetted? Do they vet the players as to?
I don't think they vet the players. They're
the ones who are vulnerable.
Yeah, they don't vet players in terms of you're more vulnerable than player A is not more vulnerable than player B.
He's turning up in this satellite. He's been in that satellite. He's been in that satellite. Let's find out about this guy. Does that go on or not?
I don't think they target players in that particular way. There's a shift from the ICC Anti-Corruption Unit, and that they are far more efficient than they were when I wrote my book and did my investigation. And in the last few years, they've really focused on the corruptors, identifying who the corruptors are, profiling them.
Big business. Rather
than profiling players who might be vulnerable.
What about the legal markets? So obviously, places like Australia and England, very betting agency dependent, and you talk about exchanges and all these different things that you can go to now. Generally, there's anomalies. If there's an anomaly in a game, it's going to come through and leak through to the legal betting markets as well, right? If people aren't just betting on the illegal, so they can use, and cricket boards do have access to the information from legal betting markets to have a look and go, why was there suddenly a big spike of betting on this particular thing? So that does happen, doesn't it?
I think it happens rarely, but ICC have got to deal with Sport Radar to cover all the betting patterns of all the games that they are responsible for, and that would include the franchise leagues, which have bought the off-the-shelf kind of coverage. So they are monitoring all the betting patterns, but I'm yet to be convinced that anybody's really monitoring those illegal markets in India.
Yeah, no, it's the legal market. Sport Radar and there's a couple of companies like Sport Radar. They're looking at the legal markets. So the fix has to leak into the legal markets.
There has to be bleed through. Yep. And you might see some of that.
Yeah.
So what happens? I mean, you've mentioned before that in a game that's just meandering along, there's a massive spike. So everybody sees it. The governing body would see it.
Yep.
How is that? Is it investigated, or is it just there was a big spike?
So they would be told by someone like Sports Radar, and I think other boards might use other companies like them as well. They would then have a look to see if there was a reason. So it might just be that everyone got really excited because the game came towards the end. It might be that Heinrich Klaassen was hitting lots of sixes, and so the fans suddenly all start betting overs on every over because they figure he's just going to keep hitting sixes or whatever that may be. If there isn't a reason like that, that's when they start to investigate to see if there was actually something untoward going on. But that is not evidence. That is a pattern, but it's not specifically evidence. They would have to match that up with phone records, with actual hard evidence to go to the player directly. But sometimes players are questioned about things in games if there is a pattern as well. But it's very rare that happens, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, betting patterns are quite hard to spot. I mean, luckily the algorithms will do it now. I mean, it used to be human eye doing it, but as an example, a dodgy betting pattern might be, if we're talking about a T20 game, in the first 6 overs, we've got a team batting first, and they're going on at about 5.5 and over.
Yes.
And the match odds market can't quite work out who should be favourite. It's almost even money the pair. And you're getting a load of money on the team who is bowling, and that price on that starts to fluctuate in terms of where the result is going to go. So you will see it from odds which are out of line, which are with what is happening on the field of play, or you'll see it in terms of huge spikes of money coming at certain junctures when something isn't really happening.
Yeah, I mean, with the advent of women's cricket, there's been an explosion. Is that vulnerable, women's cricket? Because
if they're betting on it in India and it's on TV in India, any cricket match is vulnerable.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.